Hey, everybody, we're back with another episode, a long awaited episode of Opportunity Zone Question Time with Ashley Tison. So, Ashley, we got three good questions in here today from a recent survey that we sent out to the Opportunity DB list. We got dozens of responses. These are the three that I've picked out. So, our first question is, our Opportunity Zone investment vehicle has acquired land and is in the process of developing a multi-tenant industrial buildings. If we acquire additional adjacent land and then develop additional phase two buildings and do this phase two development by only adding debt to the capital stack, when does the 10-year hold clock start on the phase two buildings and land? What do you think, Ashley?
Yeah, so Jimmy, I'm going to share my screen right now because I think it's very beneficial to kind of look at this and to draw through it. But the answer is that, and this is kind of a common misperception, is that it doesn't really matter when you buy the actual assets, because there's not a 10-year requirement on holding the actual qualified opportunity zone business property. It's all about when you drop your money into the QOF. So your 10-year hold is based upon the last dollar that effectively went into your QOF, because every dollar that you put in restarts that 10-year clock. And so let's say that you put in $1 million in 2021, and here, I'll pull this over, and then $1 million in 2022 and $1 million in 2023. And then you build your building, and then you get an offer in, let's say that you put your money in on Valentine's Day of 2021. Well, you get an offer on the Ides of March 2021, right? To where they say they make an offer you can't refuse. Well, you may want to really look at that offer, because you might want to refuse it, because if you sell in March of 2031, right, which would be 10 years after this tranche, you're going to get exactly 33% subject to the step up in basis to fair market value. The others, because it hasn't aged to 10 years yet, is going to be subject to normal capital gains tax. So it's all about when your cash goes into the QOF. And so if you're staging funds and you're staging investments into that stuff, you may want to look at that, and may want to look at how a different strategy and a couple of different strategies that we've employed with different folks relative to how you can most effectively stage that. Now, to answer the current question at hand, so let's say once again that there was $1 million that went into the QOF, and then they're going to build, so they've got their QOZB that's going to be building on this giant parcel of land, okay? And they put the $1 million in, and they bring in debt. And it could be bank debt, or it could be related party debt, right? If they're going to bring in another tranche of capital into the QOF, so let's say that they bring in another $1 million, they can actually use that to pay off the debt, or they could use that to build additional buildings. It's either way. But the phases by which they build the buildings on the property, so if they build buildings here and they build buildings here, that's phase one. And then they bring in additional round of debt for phase two, and they use that debt to build the buildings over here. Those buildings, right, are basically going to be, they're going to be subject to the step up in basis to fair market value when you get your 10-year hold at the QOF level. So it's all about 10-year-old QOF contributions. All right.
Yeah, that's very helpful, Ashley. So the key thing to point out here is that the debt is not coming in at the QOF level, and it's not equity, so it doesn't restart the clock. The debt comes in at that QOZB level, which is the portfolio company directly above the where you're building the property. So that makes sense. So I hope that answers that question. We're ready to move on to question two?
Absolutely.
Here we go. So question two today is, let me bring this up here. Question two is, our enterprise would benefit from learning whether self-directed IRAs can invest in opportunity zones and take advantage of all the benefits. Ashley, what are your thoughts on an IRA participating in a QOF deal?
So I think it can, but the question is going to be exactly how. And we need to unpack the benefits of both, right? So if you've got a self-directed IRA, that thing kind of sits behind its own firewall, right? And so if you make money, right, inside of the self-directed IRA, you don't pay money, you don't pay any taxes until you pull that money out of the IRA. So it's already kind of got the benefit of being tax-free behind the IRA firewall. And so accordingly, you wouldn't want to make an investment from your self-directed IRA into a QOF because the money that comes off of this, so like after you get to your 10 years at the QOF level, let's say that you put $1 million in and it grows over up to $10 million. Well, that $10 million is going to come back to the investor, or the $9 million of gain is going to come back to the investor tax free, but then it's got to go back behind the firewall, right? And then when you pull it out, you're going to pay taxes on it in ordinary income rates, whether that's a required minimum distribution or whatever. And so I don't necessarily know that it makes sense to have your self-directed IRA become a direct investor into a qualified opportunity fund. Now, what could be a play is that with the COVID rules relative to distributions, if you want to pull some of that money out of your self-directed IRA and you're not going to pay any taxes on it, and you have some kind of capital gains to line this up with, because unfortunately, it requires capital gains in order to be able to do a deal and to get the benefit in the opportunity zone. And I don't believe that you're going to be able to use any of the capital gains inside of the IRA, because I don't think that those carry forward to your 1040. Now, I'm not a self-directed IRA expert by any stroke of the imagination. If it does, and if that distribution would be deemed to trigger a capital gain, then that actually is a different story. And that might be the way that you might want to put it into the QOF. The third thought that I had on it, and where I think could be, very beneficial, is that if you have capital gains from another source and you're putting that into a QOF, and then you find a deal, right, that let's say that this is $200,000 worth of capital gains, but you find a deal that's going to require like $800,000 or $1 million to do the deal, whether that's $1 million in cash or $1 million of equity. Your QOZB is going to need another $800,000. And so if you've got that money that's sitting in your IRA, your self-directed IRA, you can loan that money to the QOZB and you can charge whatever interest rate you want to on it. Obviously, you have the minimum would be the AFR. And so that money that comes to the QOZB as a loan can be put to work and can basically leverage up your capital gains money in order to be able to get into a bigger project and make more money down here, right? Because if you're able to invest more, you're probably going to be able to make more. And then all of this gain on this $200,000 that's coupled up with the loan, that's going to be tax-free. And so those are a couple of strategies that I think could be a potential deal within the self-directed IRA. So be happy to once again to talk about that further with any of the folks that are out there in OZ Pros land.
Good stuff, Ashley. But for the most part, there's no added benefit really of having an IRA directly invest in a qualified opportunity fund deal, because the IRA itself is already a tax advantaged investment vehicle. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. All right. Very good. Well, let's move on to question number 3 now. And question number 3 is a question about timelines. So I think you already covered this one in the first answer, but maybe we can go through it one more time. This person asks, can you set up an OZ fund now with 20% of the money being capital gains and then 80% borrowing from yourself and then adding capital gains in future years? How would that work? What happens to capital gains added in future years, say 2022, 2023? When do you have to pay taxes on these? Is it still 2026? And do you have to wait until 2032 and 2033 to be exempt from taxes on profits? What are your thoughts there, Ashley?
Yes. So the answer is yes, almost to every single question that you asked. So the key is, so you once again, you got to start with a capital gain, and it has to be capital gain that comes in for the equity portion of this. So let's say that you've got $200,000 worth of capital gain. Okay. And you're going to dump that money into your QOF. So you've got 200K that comes into your QOF. And once again, let's call it Valentine's Day. of this year. Okay. And I mean, I got lots of deals that are happening on Valentine's Day, Jimmy. There's love in the air. There's opportunities on love in the air, man. So
Good to know.
you put your money in on Valentine's Day of 2021, and then you drop it down into your QOZB. And interestingly, is if you're into your QOZB before June 30th of this year, I can actually get you an additional 24 months on your 31-month working capital safe harbor for a total of 55 months because of the COVID extension. And so a lot of people, even though they don't have to dump their money down into the QOZB until 12/31 of this year, typically, they're going ahead and getting aggressive on it and putting it to work in the QOZB so they can take advantage of this 55 months. So the question then is so if you got 200,000, but let's say once again it's a $1 million deal, you borrow the 800,000 from yourself or from a bank. But if you borrow from yourself, you need to make sure that it walks and talks like bank debt. And that means that it's going to have amortization. It's going to amortize. It's going to have monthly payments, and then it's going to have a market rate of interest. So you can't use the AFR on this loan, right? Because you don't want it disguised as equity by the IRS. You want it to walk and talk just like you borrowed it from a bank or a lender. So then once that 800K comes in, and then let's say that on Valentine's Day of 22, you have another $200,000 come in, okay? But you've already used the $1 million to build your property, so you're not going to be doing any more expansion to that. Well, what you can do is you can take that 200,000, drop it into the QOF, drop it down into the QOZB, and then pay a portion of this $800,000 down. So now it's down. Now it's the value is at 600. Similarly, you do the same thing in 2023. But let's say that it's the full amount of the 600 grand in 2023. And so you bounce that money down into the QOF, put it into the QOZB, and then pay off this loan. And so that loan goes away, right? So once again, going back to my example, you get an offer at the Ides of March of 2031 on this property for $5 million. Well, what you're going to do is you're going to effectively take and you're going to proportion this out, right? So 80% of it would be taxable. Only 20% would be untaxable because that's the only one that's gotten the 10-year hold at the QOF level. Now, if you got an offer in, on the Ides of March of 2023 and you sold it after that, or 2033, sorry, I keep forgetting to add that 3 instead of the 2 in there. That's going to be fully tax-free and going to get a step up in basis to fair market value. So that's the answer to that specific one. One of the ways that we've been able to kind of successfully help people if they're anticipating, and then you can bring in capital all the way till December 31st of 2026. Okay. You can bring in capital gains into your QOF all the way up until that deadline. And so for folks that know that they're going to have substantial tranches of capital that are going to be coming in during that period of time, right? It doesn't do you a whole lot of good to set up multiple QOFs for each year if you're investing into the same project, right? But to the extent that you have a project that rolls and that now needs additional equity capital that makes sense to set it up to where it could have a different time frame on it, that's when we would talk about having your 2021 fund and then maybe a 2023 fund with its separate 2023 QOZB. All right.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. So essentially, every time you're bringing in a new tranche of capital gain equity, it's going to extend out that 10-year hold. You restart the clock every time.
Correct.
Makes sense.
Correct.
All right. Well, Ashley, thanks for joining me here on Opportunity Zone Question Time. If you liked this, you're going to love doing an Opportunity Zone strategy call with Ashley Tison. We have a special deal for anyone who watched this today. You can save $50 on the price of a strategy call with Ashley Tison by heading over to ozpros.com/save50. And you can set up a 60-minute Opportunity Zone Strategy Call with Ashley. He'll walk you through anything you want to know about opportunity zones. All right. Thanks for joining us today, Ashley. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jimmy. Appreciate it. Appreciate all you do in Opportunity Zone land.
You bet.